ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else joining us today for our Day 5 COP28 live segment. Welcome. We're so glad to have each and every one of you joining us for this wonderful journey that we're taking you along as our members on the ground continuously showcase to you what's going on over at COP28. Today, as usual, we'll have a number of folks on our program. You'll get to see actual live footage of what's going on the ground from our very own Michael Fidler in a little bit. But first, let's talk about the headlines. Let's see what's going on over in COP28. So some of the bigger headlines and tags today was the criticism that COP28 continues to host, actually, given that oil delegates are the largest segment of delegates attending this event. It's quite clear that the UAE, as the host of the event, has the largest delegation. However, the president, Aboujaoude, has continuously drawn criticism and has recently gone back in some comments that he made the other day about the use of oil and gas in the future of their use over time, and has basically retracted his statement saying that they were taken out of context, given his previous statements that oil and gas deserves a place at the table in a post and during climate change world. Also, to a large part of note there was the fact that quite close to 40% of the delegates attending these events over in UAE are made up of the oil and gas industry. By far the largest segment, by far the largest amount of folks attending this event are from the oil and gas industry. And on that topic, actually, Microsoft CEO Bill Gates was recently asked a question by Bloomberg as he was live attending this event about the percentage of the oil and gas delegates attending COP28. Mr. Gates essentially responded by saying that he avoided the question altogether and basically said that we are very unlikely to reach our 2 degrees Celsius goal, let alone the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal that was set out by the Paris Climate Accords. Antonio Guterres also made some comments today who said the promises that are being made at this COP28 are falling far short of what is required. Interestingly, the UAE has announced a $30 billion climate fund to attempt to draw away from the oil and gas industry, try to transition away. It's essentially a $30 billion fund to transition away from fossil fuels. So they're not just walking back their comments. I think they're also trying to walk the walk as well. Now, whether or not that fund actually goes to what they're promising that it's going to go to, we will see. Some other big news is that Nigeria, as usual, sends a very large amount of delegates to each of the COPs. In fact, over the last few years, they've drawn a lot of criticism for the sheer amount of people that they register to attend this event. And this year is no different. Close to 2,400 delegates registered to attend from the state of Nigeria. Now, to put that into perspective, the average nation sends around 80 to 85 delegates. Nigeria has signed up and registered 2,500 delegates to attend this event. Only about 500 of them received Blue Pass zones, while the rest of them are out enjoying a lavish lifestyle out there or most of them are enjoying a lavish lifestyle out there in Dubai, which has received a lot of criticism, not from the international community, but from their own citizens. A large portion of their citizens went over to X, formerly known as Twitter, to lament the improper use of their funds, their climate funds and travel funds, essentially seeing how much of their delegates are spending on lavish lifestyles inside Dubai, while they actually should be focusing on the real issues that matter. However, now that we've gotten out most of the major headlines today, we're going to turn it over to our very own Dr. John Capece, who has been attending session after session, I'm sure, and may have a lot to say about what's going on the ground at COP28. John, I'll let you take it over for a little bit.
Well, good evening, Rock. Hope all is well back in Florida. We're here at the Democrats Abroad receptions for Americans attending COP28, and I'm outside the reception venue, and Michael and Dana are inside. But first, commenting on your observation about the Nigerian delegation being so large. You said 2,500 attendees, 500 holding blue zone passes. That's quite the delegation. Interestingly, a couple of years ago at the Madrid conference, I encountered a member of one of the African delegations, neighboring country, Cameroon, and encountered very coincidentally one of my former students who I taught in 1984 when I was teaching at an agricultural college there, engineering courses. And I asked him, I said, how many of these delegates actually have relevancy to the issue of climate? How many of them are just here on a free trip junket to attend a convention and have a good time? And he said, fully half are completely unqualified to make any meaningful contribution to the climate issue. They're just here basically because they could get somebody else to pay for it, or they wanted a nice trip. So, and I'm sure that's true of many delegations. So I wouldn't simply focus on the Nigerians or any of the other African nations. I'm sure it's true. There's probably a significant number of people from Western countries who are here based upon political connections and other purposes. But the people who are here and who do intend to accomplish things, they have a lot of opportunities. It may not be in the governmental negotiations, in the actual UN negotiations, but out in the pavilions where people are talking community action, where they're talking technology, where they're talking business, things can get accomplished. And interestingly, I heard a presentation, the introductory presentation by John Kerry, and he talked about how the UN's accounting organization had stated that to properly address the climate crisis, it would require an investment, an annual investment for 30 years, every one of those 30 years, at least $2.5 trillion, and probably closer to $4 trillion. And he said that was absolutely unattainable in the current atmosphere. In other words, the current politics among all the governments was insufficient to deliver $2.5 trillion a year, much less $4 trillion a year. And therefore, we had to depend upon the private sector and business and a profit incentive. Well, that's great for him to acknowledge reality and to try to maximize the delivery of productivity on the climate crisis from the private sector. But I think that we really need to buckle down and get the nations to cough up that level, those trillions of dollars that would be required. And as we've talked about before, when you look at what a nation will invest in a serious war, say World War II, for example, that was 1/3 of our GDP, of the United States GDP, and of course other nations as well. But if you just looked at the 1/3 of the United States GDP and translated that from World War II into current dollars, that would be on the order of $7 trillion a year. And that's nearly double what they say is needed globally. So even if the United States treated the climate crisis as it did World War II, there would be enough funds to get the nations moving, get the world moving towards realistic solutions. But today is Gender and Equality or Equity Day, I believe it was. But I attended one session that dealt with the gender issue, and that was in the Rotary Club, the Rotary International Pavilion. It was excellent panel discussion. I'll talk more about that later. I also visited a couple of the nuclear organizations, the International Atomic Energy Agency and the World Nuclear Association. Had some very good conversations with them that I'll talk more about later. And then also in the Soil Health Pavilion, where that's of interest to you, Rock. Your thesis topic is on legislation dealing with putting carbon back into soils around the world, into agricultural soils, and then often discussed as regenerative agriculture. So we'll talk more about that later as well.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned the 7 trillion number and the correct, being close to the correct amount that we had invested both in World War II and what is needed for the climate crisis. And yet we're seeing these very small drops in the bucket in response, close to like 30 billion being assigned by the UAE. Kamala Harris is suggesting that 3 billion needs to go into the climate and the loss and damage fund. and many other funds that are being announced at these events, which are seemingly pretty much drops in the bucket. Dana made a wonderful comment yesterday about how we are investing, or that the annual amount invested into subsidies for fossil fuel industry is 7 trillion, very close to the number that we need for solving the climate crisis efficiently and correctly in terms of the dollar amount. And yeah, so I mean, today I think the total amount pledged was between the 30 billion assigned by the UAE, Kamala Harris's 3 billion fund. It's close to about 50 billion assigned as of today, which is again quite drops in the bucket with regard to the actual amount that we need to invest in these sort of things. I think that also today the Loss and Damage Fund received the amount that they had previously suggested that they needed to move forward. And this kind of goes on a lot of the work that was done last year in COP27 in Egypt. The Loss and Damage Fund is also the Climate Impact and Response Fund, which are treated as essentially the same fund. Essentially, they are going to nations which are receiving damages at this exact moment. So yeah, these are most of the major headlines that have been going around today, with most nations, throwing in like these little drops in the bucket compared to the total amount that they actually need to be putting in. So John, what other sessions did you attend today that you might? So you saw the Rotary session, the Atomic Energy Fund. What other panels have you seen today?
Well, I spent a considerable time at each of these three, and in fact, I was so engrossed in conversations at the Soils Pavilion that I neglected the rendezvous time to meet up with Michael to get here on time, and they were a little upset with my delaying our progress, but we got here on time. But it was very interesting. Had an excellent conversation there at the Soil Pavilion. It was led by a woman from Michigan. I wasn't able to ascertain her background yet, but we had some very good conversations, and we may have lined you up with a presentation for next year. We'll see. Once you get that thesis done. But once we were discussing, the opportunities and some of the aspects. We were also joined by a young man from Zambia who was finishing his master's degree, and he was working on public school education to bring awareness about the importance of soils in solving the climate crisis. We can achieve up to 30% of all the emissions reductions that we need to deliver. We could accomplish that conceivably through sequestering the carbon in our soils. Over the decades, over the centuries, over the millennia that we have been farming the Earth's soils, we have released significant amounts from those soils into the atmosphere. And most significantly recently, in recent decades, in the past century, in Florida alone. In Florida, I'm on the edge of what's called the Everglades agricultural area. And that's an area that's highly productive. It's farmed in sugarcane as well as vegetables and other crops. And the reason it's so productive is it used to be underwater. And all of the aquatic plants that would grow and die, their biomass would fall to the bottom, but because it was submerged underwater, it would not decompose, but gradually it would build up these peat/organic soils over the millennia. And these soils can be 20 feet thick in some places in Florida. But what we've done is to farm these areas, we've drained the water out of the soils and exposing that organic matter to oxygen, to the atmosphere. And gradually it decomposes and disappears. It's soil erosion, but it's not soil erosion through the water passing down our streams. Rather, it's soil erosion to the atmosphere because it's 80 to 90% organic matter, which means 80 to 90% of it can totally decompose into carbon, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and be emitted as greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. In Florida, we've lost 9 feet in some places, 9 or 10 feet of these organic soils since farming began around in the year 1900. So that kind of soil erosion, that kind of soil oxidation, release of carbon into the atmosphere cannot be recovered through these methods we're talking about, regenerative agriculture. Those soils are gone. Those organic soils have long left us into the atmosphere. But in our regular mineral soils, the soils we're all accustomed to that are made largely of sand and silts and clays, those can be farmed in such a way that we take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The plants collect that and transform it into their plant tissue, and particularly into their root matter, into the soil. And when those plants die, that root material remains in the soil, as does a lot of the litter from the plant material. And microbial action incorporates that into basically a stable, semi-stable material in the soil. And along with that carbon that we've captured in the soil in this way, we capture nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus that are the source of our water pollution, particularly in Florida. So these, as you know, these regenerative agriculture and carbon farming, carbon sequestration in the soils, not only can combat and be a significant contributor to reduction in greenhouse gases, not only can it combat climate change, but it can help address our water quality issues. So those are the conversations we had in the Soil Pavilion today.
I'm really glad that they're bringing up discussions around agriculture, because as many folks might know, agriculture is a significant contributor to the climate crisis. Close to a total of the fifth of all emissions around the entire globe are directly related to food consumption, food use, and food waste. Even in the USA, some might know that 12.5% of all of our emissions inside the USA are directly related to food and agricultural emissions. Many of those are the incorrect use of fertilizers. Some even can contribute directly to leaching of phosphorus or nitrogen from the soil, and the use of phosphorus as fertilizers. So I'm really glad to see that there are discussions like that at this event. And I don't think that agriculture gets as large of a center stage item as it possibly could have at these events, mostly because, as just mentioned, a fourth of all total carbon emissions, greater than the amount that is utilized in terms of flights, come directly from food, which you can kind of see is a major detractor from our need to solve, or from the ability to solve the climate crisis. And I think this segues into a really cool topic that I saw as one of the headlines today, which is former vice presidential candidate Al Gore. Typically, Al Gore gives a wonderful presentation highlighting and mostly doing a very good job of emotionally appealing to audiences with regard to the future of the climate crisis. He does a wonderful job, and I've seen his presentation a couple of times. He does a great job. But he announced a project called Climate Trace, which essentially provides granular emissions tracking. Essentially, it's a self-reporting system. They do as best of a job as they possibly can of trying to find folks who will self-report their emissions, many of them being gas, oil plants, all sorts of different plants out there that emit carbon. However, it looks to be a fairly fantastic program if more people would opt in. Essentially trying to get folks to self-report. However, this is a very contentious issue for two reasons. The first being it's just generally hard to get anybody to self-report. Taking time out of a company's precious time, or at least assigning an employee the job of tabulating their own carbon. And two is, as the world moves into a carbon trading system, as some countries are opting to do right now, that just simply means that there may not be in the future a truly relying on the honor system for self-reporting when you have a financial incentive to showcase small numbers, may mean that this system was doomed from the start. If you're looking to have honest accounting and honest tracking of carbon emissions that are not directly related to financing, for the less of amount of a carbon you emit, the more money you potentially are able to make. If that system exists, folks are not incentivized to honestly report their tracking of their carbon credits. So essentially, it sounds like a wonderful idea, but like with many things in the climate crisis, and these solutions and innovations in the climate crisis, it sounds so good on paper, but in reality, it simply will not live up to the expectations it sets out to achieve. So while I, of course, as always, applaud the incentives that former Vice Presidential candidate Al Gore, former Vice President Al Gore, presidential candidate Al Gore says, it's once again just one of those programs that you look at and you sigh and you say that this could be a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, it just simply won't live up to its name. John, what kind of thoughts do you have on a concept like the Climate Trace Program?
Well, talking about data, about the reluctance of organizations to assign significant personnel resources to delivering data that climate planners absolutely need in order to monitor our progress, as well as to make decisions between, do we pursue more of this or more of that? And that coincides with some of the conversations I had in the nuclear pavilion. I went up to two of the nuclear pavilions, as I said, the International Atomic Energy Agency and the World Nuclear Association. And I told them that, I'm the president of the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida. I want to bring back information about nuclear power that's accurate. And what I'm interested in is learning about the carbon footprint of today's nuclear power plants, both the traditional and the next generation, as well as the types of reactors that are planned in the future and what the carbon footprint might look like as we scale up the production, the deployment of nuclear power. And they had a lot of good references to provide me. And I explained to them that in no way would I be able to advocate nuclear unless the key issues are addressed. And those key issues are, of course, first, safety of the nuclear reactors themselves, and safety of the waste storage. And then the costs. Is it competitive with our renewables at their current pricing and their likely lower future pricing? And then third, the carbon footprint. So the safety, the costs, and the carbon. And I said, to be able to advocate to voters that they support candidates who support nuclear, I would need to be convinced that nuclear could meet all of those requirements. Now, on the carbon, they did have reports to provide to me and references, so I'm looking forward to diving into those. But they also said the same thing. They said data, data, data. It's so hard for them. They want to deliver this carbon footprint data for nuclear, but they're encountering the same issues as far as being able to get sufficient data input from the various companies that are involved in the full range of the activities, whether that be the mining of the uranium itself, or the refinement of the uranium, other parts of the fuel cycle, the construction of the power plant, the ongoing management and maintenance of the power plant, the nuclear waste storage has a carbon footprint, as does the decommissioning of old power plants. So all of these things require a big research effort. And this ties into our Campus Climate Corps discussions about ecological economics and the need for universities all around the world, all around the United States in particular, to develop research and teaching programs where students and faculty can begin to tackle some of these very complex and ongoing investigations into the carbon footprint of not only nuclear, but every other industry, every other product and service in our economy, so that people are in a position to know what is actually green and what is not, what is more green than an alternative. You may have two nuclear options, and one may be greener than the other. So to have that information is essential because it needs to be absolutely accurate. So we had those conversations, and they expressed an interest in having an ongoing relationship with organizations such as ours in the pursuit of this information and the dissemination of this information to the public and to voters and to candidates, so that they can make more informed decisions on which candidates they choose, and then the candidates, when elected, can make more informed decisions on which directions they help move our society.
It's really good that you had those discussions, in my opinion, simply because it seems like a nuclear power plant, because all the energy is extracted in one singular area, it would seem that the ability to track the amount of carbon utilized in both the creation of the power plant, the utilization of the power plant, might be a little bit more simpler than relying on solar panels, which are installed over a large variety of places, on houses, on buildings, on university campuses. It seems like the nuclear power plant would be a wonderful place in order to test what one area can generate in terms of energy, but also probably the very minute amount of carbon that is used, probably mostly in the creation process. If I'm not stepping on anyone's toes in that statement, the most amount of carbon that we'll ever see the nuclear power plant produce is simply in probably its creation.
I wouldn't be so confident in that, but you're right in that nuclear should be an industry where we're able to document the carbon footprint simply because it is so highly regulated that those permits, I'm sure, cover every aspect of the operation relative to how many people, how everything is constructed and built. But those documents, one report, it can be this thick. And every one of those pages includes important elements describing and documenting the nuclear power system. And then every one of those input elements is going to have to be tracked through the companies and the people that provide those to come up with good estimates on how much carbon is involved in delivering that product or service to the nuclear industry. So it should be well documented, but that's only half the battle. All that tells you is who to contact to get the information. It won't necessarily deliver the detailed carbon information. But, and I've said this before, just as our products, when you go to the grocery store now, there's a nutritional label on that can, right? Or any of packaging. It tells you exactly how many grams of this, how many grams of that. I think that every product in the future should have a carbon footprint data section attached to it. So consumers know what the impacts, not only on their own body through the nutrition, but through the carbon impact upon the planet of that product and service. And that wouldn't just apply to food, that would apply to every single product that we consume.
Yes, I think it'd be a really cool world where we're driving through a drive-through here in the USA and we hear, oh, your total's 1150 and also 0.01 tons of carbon.
Right.
As people become more climate conscious, I think that they will want to see, just as there are nutrition facts in a bottle or a can, they might want to see that exact impact on climate. And this,
well,
go ahead.
I think that's an excellent, political advocacy position, is to begin demanding that the government move in that direction and require that. Once the government requires labeling, it doesn't necessarily become the government's job to do the labeling, but it simply needs to make sure that there are standards by which the companies follow to make those calculations on the carbon impact of those products and services.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that as the technology progresses, it might become easier and easier to do these sort of things. Like Al Gore's Climate Trace program sounds like that would be a perfect opportunity to integrate the amount of carbon that a singular institution emits, and then how to utilize that data, track that data in order to label a can of the amount of carbon emissions on that can. And, I think that as time goes on, humans will become more and more climate conscious. They will desire more and more of that information, and that sort of system, I think, will be incredible.
And being able to quantify it will also mean that we're able to utilize carbon offsets in the developing, in oceans, in tropical forests around the world in the global south, where they then will reap the benefits of just how much that sequestration is worth it. And hello.
Well, it looks like we've got Dana on the line.
John,
welcome, Dana.
And hello, Rock. Nice to see you this evening. I wanted to welcome you. We have a gathering of Americans here that have flown in from all over the world to participate in COP, that are involved in solving this climate puzzle from every possible angle, from finance to solar to nuclear, from every possible angle. We're delighted to have you here. I'd love to introduce you to a few of the Americans who are joining us here tonight to celebrate what we at Democrats Abroad are trying to do, because as you know, without voting Democratic in the next election, what we have accomplished will be set back decades. We are here as Democrats. John is here representing the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida. And we, with the Democrats Abroad UAE and Democrats Abroad Environment and Climate Crisis Council, are celebrating what we can do, our powerful voice, by the vote that we cast in getting Democrats elected up and down the ballot. It is so important because in 2024, this will truly dictate the future of our planet. So welcome to our gathering, and looking forward to introducing you to a few of the folks this evening. John, you've been at the venue, COP venue. I've been at a finance, the Bloomberg offsite, which is looking at finance. I heard Ali Zaidi speak today, and was a fascinating day looking at how we can finance our climate initiatives, some discussion as well on carbon capture and the future of carbon capture, what's working, what needs to work in the future. This was an important day for all of us to understand that to get where we need to go, we need the financial community to be behind it, as well as the political and governmental bodies to align with that. What were your experiences today, John, on the ground in the COP venue?
Well, before you joined us, I was talking about my encounters at both the Soils Pavilion and the Nuclear Pavilion. And, you know, I talked some about the carbon accounting for the nuclear power industry. But one of the other things they discussed as far as the nuclear industry is because it's been languishing for decades, they do not have a continuous stream of young professionals coming into the industry. And, it, you know, as the highest tech of high tech industries, the nuclear industry needs the best and the brightest to manage and design and build these facilities. And very important that the government begin creating opportunities, even if the private sector is going to lag in the assimilation of these young professionals. The government is going to have to create opportunities to where they have career tracks and they can move ahead and until such time as the nuclear private industry is ready to bring them in as they deploy additional power. But I also today was I'm interested to hear more about the finance experience and sessions you attended. But I attended the Rotary session that dealt with gender and gender equality and some of the issues there. And it was very interesting conversation. It talked about, they provided a framework for the panel discussion by explaining how climate impacts often fall disproportionately around the world on women.
Of course.
And, you know, if there are water shortages, that means women are tasked with toting water from greater and greater distances as
gathering fuel.
Health, exactly. And as their health impacts upon people who are the caregivers for those people suffering from additional ailments derived from the climate crisis, it all falls upon women. And that also diminishes the opportunities for girls to attend school and to elevate their status and to bring opportunity to the community. In Rotary, often I was a Rotarian once, and often Rotary clubs partner with Rotary clubs in other nations to do development projects in those countries. And often they're about health, polio, and about water. And they had one specialist there talking about the water projects that they're doing and how they provide, particularly in an arid environment, like you have in certain parts, like from Egypt down to Sudan, into certain parts of East Africa. And these are arid areas that have rivers, but they only flow a short time out of the year.
Sure.
And their project was to create these small dams, you know, maybe 6-10 feet. And as these rivers flow during a year, it captures only a relatively small area of water. But what it does do is, because these tend to be flash floods in fairly denuded landscapes, it captures the rainfall displaces, it erodes lots of heavy particles.
They don't have a sustainable water catchment system.
Exactly. So over the years, what happens is this water rushes down, hits this dam, and it deposits those sands. And after a period of about 3 years, it fills up this 10-foot area with sand, and it creates an artificial aquifer. So then once the rains stop, the water is logged into, is entrained in that sand. It's not exposed to the atmosphere, so it doesn't evaporate as readily. So it becomes a long-term water storage system. And they're talking about how women were the organizers for these projects typically, and how they relied and worked with the women in the communities to design, and then have the men and other people come in and construct their own small systems. And they said it had a tremendous impact upon the community by not only providing water, because the children cannot go to school unless often they bring their own water. And then it provides small amounts of water for their gardens that are very important for, nutrition.
John, I have just the person here to share with you all, an American who's come here to COP, who works in solar solutions in the global south with women and water and agriculture. And I would love to get him over here to share a little bit with you about his experience. If you'll hold on a second, I'm going to go get him. I think it's very appropriate for this exact conversation.
Great, great. And while you do that, I'll just provide a little filler and talk a little bit more about the Rotary session. Also, at this Rotary session, they had...
I was going to say, Michael is ready with his photos if you...
oh, well, that's always the best part of these shows. So, Michael.
Yes, so Michael, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Rock. It has been a busy evening, but I'm glad I got the floor. So let me share my screen and give you a quick overview of today's images. It's then been a bit of a confusing day. So let me show you some of the confusion I faced. Do you see my screen okay now?
I can see it fine.
All right. Well,
yes.
When I saw this huge building with all the lights, and in the left bottom corner you can see Turkme, I thought it will be a Turkmenistan pavilion. The name of the restaurant, it's called Turkme Food. So no pavilion, although it was within COP, it was just a restaurant. I walked in few of the pavilions. This one is from India, obviously, and I have to say, it's kind of, I was disappointed. It's not as shiny as it used to be. It's not that big. It's simply much smaller than it used to be. This will be just one quick shot from the Madagascar pavilion. They were having some celebration there, and they were quite happy. I don't know, someone probably arrived there, but they just stood up all together and took many photos
Great,
together.
wonderful.
Now,
good to meet you.
I have a lot of feedback from them. Thank you.
Yeah,
this is an image from the Indonesian pavilion. Actually, it's in front of the Indonesian pavilion. They were having some dancing session there. That was pretty nice. They were trying some people in. It looked like a party. I think they were just trying to unwind after the full working day. And right next to Indonesia, there was a pavilion which says Italy is here. So I obviously assumed that this is Italian pavilion. I walked in. It turned out it's an Italian restaurant, which is called Italy is here. I haven't seen the Italian pavilion yet. It's simply this is just the wrong part of the of COP. Then I walked to the US pavilion, and I've been here for 5 days at COP. I still haven't been able to get in. Today, again, there was a lot of security guys standing in front of it, and they did not want to let me in. There was a long queue. I assumed that someone important was coming in. I just sat down and had my lunch, and then there was, if you can see on the left-hand side, is two guys. One of them is from national security, and one is from the presidential personal guard. I knew someone important was coming in, and then the man of the moment showed up. It was John Kerry. I walked with him for a few blocks to take a couple of shots of him, and some people stopped him as well, wanted to take selfies with him, and he was okay with that. And yet another just image, him walking through, getting to one of his sessions. Many security, and they gave me some very unpleasant looks because I walked with them for maybe 200 or 300 meters. And I knew it was time for me to leave, because as you might remember, we have met John Kerry together at COP28 in Madrid. Here is an image of you giving a handshake with John Kerry. And this is still from Madrid, well, 4 years ago. And I think I took many photos of John Kerry. I was happy with having these and did not really need to follow him for the whole day. And then I walked into the main plenary, where another important speaker was, and you can already see her on this photo on the very right. She was hosting this session. Is the former secretary of Hillary Clinton. There was a lot of interest in her, and she told, the panel was about gender equality. She was delivering some interesting notes, and there were very important women with her also during her speech. There were people from Microsoft, from LinkedIn. So I would say. Now the panel lasted only for 45 minutes, and then Hillary Clinton left, and I was very disappointed in myself because I did not take photos of her. And at that point, I was just about to be really upset with me, but fortunately, there was immediately, well, maybe after 15 minutes, there was another panel when half of the audience just left the room because they all assumed that the sessions were completely over. And Hillary Clinton was part of the other session. And then was saying, then I got enough time to take the photos of her like I wanted. Again, when I take photos, I don't really pay attention of what is happening around. I just wonder about the shutter speed and aperture, ISO, and the photography stuff. I cannot really tell much what was the second session about because I was just fully focused on taking the images. Well, another image of Hillary Clinton just thinking about the stuff what was discussed there. And then, as a surprise, John Kerry showed up as well. And well, what would be a COP without John Kerry? Enough time to take many images of him. He was delivering a nice, very nice speech. Then I could finally focus what he was talking about. But that's not for me. Joined the plenary on the gender equality talk. And with that being said, I'm turning back to you, Rock, again. See you tomorrow.
Well, definitely. I think both you and I and everyone else will be looking forward to it. Actually, I don't know about you, but I think the rest of us definitely will. Thank you, as always, Michael. Okay. Now, did we have a special guest there, Dana, that you were about to bring on?
Yes, I wanted to introduce this is Bob Freling of the Solar Electric Light Fund. He's here for COP, and he's going to tell you a little bit about solar solutions, what they do to elevate the plight of women and children, and rural communities that are otherwise off the grid across the global south. Bob?
Welcome to the program, Bob. We're glad to have you here.
Hi, are you Rock?
Yes, I am.
All right, nice to meet you, Rock.
Welcome to the program.
It's a little hard to hear you, but I'll do my best. A little noisy in there.
All right, so Dana was saying you have some information that you might want to distribute to our listeners.
Sure. So I am the executive director of a DC-based nonprofit organization called the Solar Electric Light Fund, or SELF, as the acronym goes. And for the last 30 plus years, we have been bringing access to modern energy to rural and remote villages in developing countries, using the sun principally as a way to electrify homes, schools, clinics, provide access to water, to drinking and irrigation, small businesses, wireless communications. And we've worked a lot with women over the years. We've trained women to become solar technicians. And more recently, we've been focused on helping women start up solar businesses. For example, in Uganda, we partnered with an organization that is now using solar ovens to bake bread and sell these baked goods for income generation. So, yeah, it's an important topic. Close to 1 billion people still do not have access to electricity in the world. And question of how these communities are going to gain access is a critical challenge. If it's going to be through fossil fuels, I think that will have disastrous consequences for the planet. The good news is the cost of solar energy has dropped quite dramatically over the last decade, and it's become increasingly affordable and practical to come into these remote villages and quickly deploy solar solutions that can provide power for schools and health clinics, water pumping systems, and small businesses. So it's a solution that it's already happening, but it needs to be scaled dramatically. With 1 billion people without power, it's simply unacceptable.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. You know, what you do is incredibly interesting. I'm really glad to, and thank you so much for being on the program with us.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. And if that's all there is, I guess I'll turn it back to Dana now. But thanks, Rock. It was great to meet you, and congratulations on all the good work you did.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and I think all of our listeners do as well. So thank you so much for that segment. I really appreciate it. To the end of our program here today, as many of you know, we're doing our main coverage every day of COP28, and we will be showcasing our coverage over the next few days as we go towards the middle of COP, and then of course the very end as well. We will be consistently delivering this coverage, both the headline, the main news, as well as the individual segments that our members are attending. So thank you to each and every one of you who are attending the segment today, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for day 6 of our COP28 DECF and Democrats Abroad coverage. Thank you so much for attending. We'll see you tomorrow.